Well, Tucker Carlson's interview with Colonel Douglas MacGregor, a regular guest of ours on the mother of all talk shows, may well turn out to be the most important interview that you will ever watch, unless it's heated and you live a long life to live and watch to many others. But if you don't, then it will have been the most important tour de force by a military man, a serving officer, a combat veteran, a former advisor to the Pentagon and to the White House. Tucker Carlson's own monologue, we might call it, was equally powerful, but the grasp of detail, the verisimilitude of the battlefield displayed by Colonel MacGregor will live long in the imagination, if, that is, we live long. Tucker Carlson has now asked to interview President Putin. I could not myself do so because, although they wouldn't like to test it in court, the meaning, it seems to me, although I cannot ask a lawyer, for no lawyer would be legally permitted to advise me, but it seems to me the meaning of Liz Truss's order in council regarding the dealings of people like me with anybody in Russia in any position of power would be that I would be subject to prosecution and potentially 7 years in prison if I interviewed Vladimir Putin. But Tucker Carlson can do so because America is, despite everything, a far freer country than the United Kingdom, though the United Kingdom, with a splendid conceit of itself, will find that formulation hard to swallow. But it's proved the pudding in the eating. If Tucker Carlson goes to Moscow and interviews Putin, it will break the internet because not hundreds of millions. I think the last interview between Carlson and Trump is now over 250 million views. Just imagine that. If he'd done it on Fox, it would have got 3 million views. If he'd done it on the mother of all talk shows, he'd have got over 2 million views. But Tucker Carlson achieved more than 250 million views interviewing Trump. He'll get more when he interviews Putin because all over the world, people are now open to and indeed searching for a way out of the disaster that we, or rather our leaders, have gotten us into. So more power to your elbow, Mr. Carlson. I'm pretty sure the interview will go ahead. And I hope that Putin is able, with the vast international audience that interview would have, to reach us, to reach those who want to know what it's all about, what's at stake, and where is it going. We can't interview Putin, but we can interview the legendary Scott Ritter. We do regularly. His last clip with me obtained 250,000 views, a record YouTube clip on Mose. And I'm pretty sure tonight's will be no different. Jailhouse Rock, we're asking. Will Donald Trump make the jailhouse rock? Will he go from the jailhouse to the White House? I'm increasingly persuaded that he will do so, and in a landslide. Now, for the numbskulls out there, I say that not because I want Donald Trump to be the president of the USA. I want Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be the president of the USA. Have you got that? How many times do I need to repeat that? I'm making an observation as a political figure of more than 50 years experience, more or less full time in politics, and as a broadcaster and a journalist and a man that can read the writing on the wall. And I'll tell you, when the moment was that I finally concluded, I think definitively, that Donald Trump will win the next presidential election. It was when I saw that mugshot from the jailhouse in Georgia. The district attorney who's prosecuting him, Fanny somebody, crazy name, crazy lady. When I saw not only that it was a mugshot in which the Americans like to specialize, they love dressing accused people, not convicted people, people who have the presumption of innocence, who are innocent until proven guilty. They love to dress them up like they'd just fallen off the Monopoly board in that corner, the get out of jail free card corner. They love to put them in chains and manacles and do the perp walk. They love to bring them into a courtroom like they were already multiply convicted monsters, even though at that stage, at least, they haven't even been tried, let alone convicted. So they love this kind of thing. And overwhelmingly, it's black people that appear in pictures like this. Ask your memory if that's true or not. And actually, one of the first consequences of this picture in Georgia, once the heartland of the Confederacy, was to achieve a massive swing amongst black voters in favor of Donald Trump. They saw in that picture something of their own lives or the lives of relatives or people that they know in their communities. And the internet has exploded with black people, some of them the most unlikely coves, saying they're getting behind Donald Trump. I won't use the N-word. They are entitled to use it, and most of them did. For them, Donald Trump has become one of them, unfairly victimized by the US injustice system, that if it can, will send him away on a sentence of hundreds of years, when everybody knows that this is only happening because if it doesn't, then Donald Trump will win the election by such a landslide that even the ballot riggers in the state of Georgia or Ohio or anywhere else, Wisconsin, will not be able to do a damn thing about it. What's he charged with? He's charged with resisting the outcome of an election, with denying the outcome of an election, with believing, or at least pretending to believe, that the election result was different to the one that was published and implemented. But of course, there is scarcely a politician alive, including me, who has never believed and or opined that their election was stolen, that their election result should be overturned, that it was not genuine, that it was a fake, rigged election. That's what Trump claimed. Nixon claimed it in 1960 with some validity, that President Jack Kennedy, the best president they ever had stolen the election, or rather his father, in alliance with the mob in Chicago, who still run Chicago, had stolen it for him. Don't you recall Al Gore contesting the election of George W. Bush, again, with every justification? That election was stolen. And all of the Democrats, Michael Moore even made a movie that won an Oscar about it. Don't you remember? Stacey Abrams in the state of Georgia doing everything that she could to overturn the election that defeated her for governor of the state. Don't you recall Hillary Clinton claiming that she had been illegitimately robbed of the presidency by some Russian Facebook ads? Don't you remember any of these things? Don't you remember all these Democrats who insisted that Trump was not the legitimate president of the US, and they spent 4 years trying to force him out of it? How's that for denying the result of an election? How's that for seeking to reverse the outcome of an election and to put Trump on trial when he is ahead of Joe Biden in the public opinion polls, when he's ahead by up to 50 points of all other Republican nominees to fight Joe Biden? This is banana republic territory. And Fanny, you might have thought you were being very clever, but actually you have given Trump an election victory on a plate. Now, I don't know if they will be able to actually jail Trump. I don't know if the deep state in the United States might not consider that that actually would be the worst outcome of all, for a man to become elected president when he's behind bars in a Georgia penitentiary. I don't know. I like to think, but then I always do like to think that people will eventually come to their senses. But if they do, that's not going to stop Trump. And then, as Tucker Carlson put to Donald Trump in the now famous world record shattering interview, why wouldn't they kill you? After all, this is a country that kills its presidents. It removed Nixon, a wiser man than any that came after him, from office over an office burglary in the Watergate building. This is a country that murdered in plain sight their greatest president, Jack Kennedy, in that nightmare on Elm Street. This is a country that murdered his brother in California when he was on his way, ineluctably, to become the president in 1968. Why would they stop short of rigging elections? Why would they stop short of stopping Donald Trump with extreme prejudice? So Trump raised a lot of money in the wake of that mugshot, $70 million in 2 days. His opinion poll ratings have leapt 5% since the publication of that mugshot. I strongly suggest, Donald, as kind of a fellow Scot to you, that you invest anything that you have got to invest in personal security, because your card is marked, your number, your name is on a bullet somewhere in the armory of the deep state or any patsy that they can find with the capability of doing that job. Who killed Prigozhin? Well, we don't yet know, but we do know that he's dead. So those wishing for a Brigadoon moment where every 7 years Prigozhin reappears in the bush somewhere, perhaps in Sahelian Africa, sightings of him like Elvis on the moon or Michael Jackson in the mall, you can forget about that. Prigozhin is dead, as is Udkin, his number 2. And number 3 has now risen to the post of number 1. The question is, what will Russia do with Prigozhin now? Will it elevate his memory? Will he get a kind of state funeral? Will Putin attend the funeral? What will Russia do with the Wagner Group now? Will they rename it? They keep saying that it's going to be absorbed into the Russian armed forces, but that never seems to happen. You know my view, I've stated it many times. I abhor the excrescence of mercenary military companies in the state. The state must have a monopoly of that kind of force. But that's up to them. Scott Ritter will know what they're likely to do next, and it's one of the things that I'll be asking him, but only one of those things, because I have multiple questions about what happens next in the Ukraine. I have a strong feeling that, as another of our famous guests, Larry Johnson, said today, it's very likely that Volodymyr Zelensky will face a military coup in the not too distant future, as the flower of the manhood of Ukraine withers on the vine, as the autumn rains and the winter snows and frosts loom ever larger on the horizon, and as the famed and ill-fated so-called counter-offensive turns into a bloody failure, and indeed has now, particularly on the Kupiansk front, gone the other way, with Russia advancing almost without resistance on that particular front. But let me turn to a domestic story, but actually it's not that domestic. It is a story, I'm sure, that could have been read and told anywhere in the so-called Western world. I refer to the story today that a 4-year-old child in a nursery school called Genesis in Hull, have you seen Hull, was force-fed a book called Grandad's Pride, in which are depicted presumably gay men in fetish gear, in a variety of clutches. I mean real fetish gear. I mean bondage gear for 4-year-olds or less in a nursery in England. Now, I know that Labour pioneered all this stuff, but Britain is supposed to have a conservative government. Indeed, has had one for the last 13 years. And yet this keeps on happening. In secondary schools, in primary schools, and now in nursery schools. Now, what I'm about to say has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that Grandad is gay. I have nothing against gay people. This program would not be coming out tonight but for my gay friends that produce it. I'm talking about the sexualization of small children. I have an interest. I declare it. I am a father of 6 children, 5 of them young children. And my eldest child has 5 young children of her own. So my children are in the school system. My children go to a Roman Catholic school. Thank God. Thank God that the church has some means of defending our children against this premature sexualization. And I pray that they, from the Pope downwards, continue to resist these rising tides of toxicity that are poisoning our young people with sexual matters many years before they are emotionally, intellectually, morally ready to receive the messages that they will in time receive and make their own judgments. Now, Grandad's Pride was written by the recipient of the Waterstones Book Prize. It is published by Schuster, one of the world's biggest publishing houses. Genesis is a nursery school in the British system governed by British elected politicians. And yet, these small children were exposed in this book to illustrations of girls who'd had their breasts removed with visible scars, top trans scars, they call them. Men in the aforementioned suits, clothing, sexual clothing. Gay men don't walk around at work or down to Sainsbury's dressed in fetish gear. They wear it for sex. Good. Lovely. I like people who dress up for sex privately. Not to frighten the horses. Not to confuse the children. But between consenting adults. Behind closed doors, that's all I'm asking for. I will not stand idly by. I will not remain quiet whilst 4-year-old children are fed sexualized material that they cannot possibly understand or evaluate, but are being fed it so that it's in there and so that it will influence their thinking later on. How else? What else can it be for? I'd be as angry if a 4-year-old child was given a book containing images of women dressed as I like them to be dressed at bedtime behind closed doors. I would be just as angry, but we all know that that would never happen. Could never happen. No school would ever give a 4-year-old child images of women in black stockings and high heels. No school would be permitted to do so. Waterstones would never give an award to anyone who produced that book. Schuster would never publish it. And the big bookstores would not be giving it the house room that Granddad's Pride has just got. I'll be right back. I told you, this is the mother of all talk shows.